Watches are one of the best accessories a person can have, and the most appreciated gift for the watch collector in your life. Little kids everywhere might get their first watches out of a cereal box, or maybe a watch with their favorite Disney character from a toy shop. These would last until they were lost or broken and rarely had the correct time. But no one forgets the first real watch they get, whether it is during middle school, purchasing a watch at the local mall, a graduation present, or maybe even a wedding gift. Of course, alongside growing up, you also become more aware of the status symbol of certain brands, like the most famous watch brand of all, Rolex. This luxury watchmaker has a long history, which adds to its prestige and value. Even the cheapest model of watches would cost thousands of dollars. But they weren't always the biggest luxury watch in the world. They had a humble beginning with a visionary at its head. The great triumph of Rolex all began with the founder, Hans Wilsdorf, who became orphaned at the age of 12 and was sent to boarding school by his well-to-do uncles. It was this necessity to become self-reliant at an early age that gave him the motivation and fire to chase after his dreams, no matter the obstacle. Hans started his watchmaking journey by learning the best methods and practices in Switzerland. At the time, the most popular way people would keep track of the time was with expensive pocket watches. However, Hans Wilsdorf believed that the wristwatch was the way to the future. He knew that the way to jump ahead of the future competition in the wristwatch sector was to have the most innovative manufacturer around. In the year 1905, he, along with his business partner, opened a firm called Wilsdorf & Davis. They were determined to become the best watch distributors in Britain. To achieve this, they wanted to expand the demographic that wore wristwatches, since at the time they were seen as accessories or akin to jewelry for women. It was around this time that they came up with a name for their own brand of watches, Rolex. According to Hans, the name, Rolex, came to him as if it was whispered in his ear. So, in 1908, Manufacture de Montres Rolex SA was born. The name Rolex is a brilliant one, as Hans had put a lot of thought into his creation. He wanted something that could be said in every language, a universal status symbol that needed no translation. It was only 5 letters, which means it was short enough to be engraved onto every piece they sold, as well as easy to remember. Looking even more deeply into it, the name itself even sounds like a watch being wound up, giving it a deeper connection to the name and the product in the minds of consumers. Since they wanted their wristwatches to be regarded as more reliable than the rest, they focused on reaching a higher level of precision in their products. They decided to prove to everyone that chronometric precision was possible with watches this small. Eventually, all of this hard work would evolve into Rolex earning the first Swiss certificate of chronometric precision for women's watches, which means they had been able to achieve a status no other watchmakers have ever had before. The next obstacle they wanted to tackle was making the watch popular with men. The issue that Hans saw with making wristwatches popular for men was their delicacy. Men were thought to want something tougher for their perceived rougher lifestyle. The wristwatches of the time had to be worn with care, as a bracelet might have been. However, he had a plan to make wristwatches accurate and waterproof. By the year 1920, Hans had moved to Geneva, Switzerland, and started up Montres Rolex SA, where he was closer to his watch supplier and also benefited from the fine reputation of Geneva as the center for the best watchmakers in the world. Hans would begin his quest to create the first dust and waterproof wristwatch. It took until 1926 when he unveiled the Oyster. This is a great victory for Rolex and cemented them in history. One of the most expensive watches in the world today is the Rolex Oyster watch from 1926. This watch was previously owned by the actor Paul Newman and is now worth almost $20 million at auction. Rolex would continue to make history as they created a new marketing technique called the testimony concept, which showcased the ability of his watches. He did this when he heard of a woman who claimed to have swam across the English Channel, and he decided to ask her to carry the Rolex watch around her neck as she swam across the English Channel again. As the woman swam for over 10 hours in cold weather, and the watch was proven to continue working in perfect order, people were sold on its abilities. To celebrate the success of his watches, Hans made sure to have it written about on the front page of the newspaper, the Daily Mail. The entire world heard about his incredible watches. The fine marketing mind of Hans Wilsdorf would strike again as he continued to market the Rolex Oyster. He would have his watches advertised submerged in fish bowls. There would be fish bowls complete with swimming little fish in storefronts, as well as photographed in papers and advertisements. He would also use celebrities and models to advertise this watch with their hands submerged in fish bowls as well. The innovation didn't stop with the success of the Oyster. Next, Hans wanted to create a watch with a perpetual rotor. Wristwatches of the time had to be wound by hand every day, an action which compromised the dust and waterproof aspect of the watch when it was carefully sealed. After all, the impressive watch could be destroyed during the daily winding necessary for it to remain functional. This made the need for a watch that would wind itself all the more important. Thus, the Rolex Oyster Perpetual was born. It was able to wind up the watch with the motion of a person wearing the watch, allowing it to remain highly precise. In 1931, the technology that allows the watch to wind itself was patented by Rolex. The newest model of the watch was released, called the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. This watch has the honor of being the first ever waterproof and self-winding wristwatch on the market and in the world. To market this beautiful watch, Hans focused on the most impressive feats going on in the world and having this watch present and functioning. The first expedition to fly over Mount Everest was an opportunity to showcase the impressive capabilities of the Rolex Oyster Perpetual. A couple of years later, in 1933, the watch was seen on the wrist of a race car driver, Malcolm Campbell, who was known as the King of Speed, as he broke a world speed record. The Rolex brand would gain more fame as the years went by, and Hans began adding important elements that would help along with his watch's brand recognition. For example, the Rolex crown logo was documented in 1931, and in 1933 the name Rolsor would be documented as being a combination of gold and steel, now associated with the Rolex style and branding. While the Oyster editions of the Rolex company were famous, they continued to create more models that rose to their own fame and even defined entire decades for the company. In 1945, the Oyster Perpetual Datejust was released, a self-winding watch that would also tell the user the date in a small corner box. It was designed with a Jubilee bracelet made just for it, an instantly recognizable fashion to this day. In 1953, Rolex released the Submariner watch, which would be among the first professional watches that they would create for the type of person who would go on to do daring and impressive things out in the world. Made to withstand activities like deep-sea diving, mountain climbing, flying, and exploration, this watch can be submerged up to 100 meters underwater. In 1956, the Rolex Day-Date watch improved upon the design of the Perpetual Date just by including the day of the week as well as the date. This watch was particularly favored by politicians around the world and was only available in two styles, 18-karat gold or platinum. Hans Wilsdorf passed away in 1960, but Rolex continued to thrive and became known as the luxury brand it is today. The year 1963 saw the Cosmograph Daytona introduced to the world and was marketed as a tool for race car drivers because of its durable construction and excellent timekeeping capabilities that would appeal to those who make every second count. Conclusion: as they rolled out new models, they also began to upgrade the technology they used in their watches. In 1985, the company began to use 904L, which is a type of premier steel never before used in watchmaking, which makes them so expensive today. In the current day, Rolex is the most famous watch brand in the world. Thank you for your time. For more updates and content about the world of watches, make sure to like and subscribe.